All right, so I need everybody to picture that you're in a big conference room. I'm going to yell, good morning, everyone. And everybody needs to yell back at their computers, good morning. So good morning, everybody. And then I come up with something that, hey, come on, I can't hear you. You guys need to wake up. Say good morning, everyone. All right, I think I heard somebody that time. All right, so my name is Kevin Lout. I'm the System-Wide Director of Construction Management at the Chancellor's Office. I'm excited, honored, and humbled to have the opportunity to announce our keynote speaker this morning. So I personally discovered our next speaker when I attended the National Lean Construction Institute conference a few years ago during a workshop session that was dedicated just for construction owners, which explored the benefits of modern lean collaborative construction delivery methods and the importance of relationships and trust in enabling these processes to be successful. And as some of you guys know, we like to support a lot of those collaborative methods in our construction. We even have our delivery method called Collaborative Design Build. So our next speaker, as an executive business consultant, speaker, and author, has had a significant impact on the construction industry through the development and creation of the Mindshift Consortium, made up of top executives from America's largest construction and architecture firms, and by publishing the book, The Commercial Real Estate Revolution, which I personally recommend over and over. And I should have a copy at the office if anybody wants to borrow it. He has also tackled other issues related to both business and higher education, which he has published in the books Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, and Humanizing the Education Machine, just to name a few. His expertise in construction, work environments, and education is a rare combination of expertise, which we thought would be a perfect fit for an audience this morning. So without further ado, joining us today to discuss the concept of building resilient organizations, please join me in providing a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Rex Miller. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Kevin, thank you very much. That's a great endorsement. If you can write that down and I can give it to my wife, I would appreciate that. So the topic today is resilient organizations and the 6 disciplines for post-traumatic growth. And there are 3 reasons why I think this is a timely, essential topic. Number one, the pandemic really exposed our vulnerabilities as organizations, as institutions, and as individuals. Number 2, I think we're all starting to recognize we're moving into a new era of unpredictable, complex challenges that face us. The military has an acronym called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. They have training around building resiliency, and that's the ability to not only bounce back, but to become stronger. But the third element here, and this is my experience over the last 20 years, that adopting these 6 disciplines builds greater effectiveness in your relationships, in life in general, greater satisfaction and happiness, regardless of the circumstances around you. So let's look at some of the areas that we're going to talk about here. First of all, I want to help you understand why looking at the stages of a pandemic are really important to us. This is not just a normal challenge. This is pandemic of global proportions. And there are different psychological stages that populations go through with a mass disaster like this. The second area are the stages of grief. Now, I'm only going to provide these 2 for context as we begin. But what I discovered early on in my coaching with clients is that everybody was going through at least one of the stages and bouncing back and forth through that. So I'm going to give us some encouragement with that, but also kind of a charge to bring this to light in our workplaces. Secondly, what is post-traumatic growth? It may be a term you've heard of. Some of you may have not heard of it, but there's solid research that comes behind that, and it came out of the military, and I'll go into a little bit of that background and context. Then what are the 6 disciplines? And I have an acronym that I'll go through. It's called RACE P2. And then finally, how do we get started on this? So as Kevin mentioned, here's a little bit of my background. I graduated in 1977 and was a tennis pro. but got engaged and needed a real job. So I got a job as a project manager for Southwestern Bell, now AT&T, in 1978. Somewhere in the early 2000s, I became very frustrated with the delivery of capital projects. And I proposed a process and a proposal to several stakeholders in the business: GSA, American Institute of Architects, several large players and stakeholders. And it was 18 organizations and 38 people. And we went on a journey to discover who's breaking the rules and getting better results. Now, it resulted in the book that Kevin mentioned. The title has really nothing to do with the actual topic. It's really about eliminating waste, getting rid of conflict, creating those collaborative, trust-based capital project teams. But the publisher, my very first book, thought that the commercial real estate revolution would sell better. Now, in going forward with this, what we found is that our industry has great insight into business issues as well that we typically don't get tapped to do. And that led to the research on how do we help improve workplace engagement, change, and culture. Then that led to research on workplace health and well-being. And as Kevin also mentioned, there's an education stream as well. Similar, Humanizing the Education Machine was about student engagement. Whole, however, really tapped into some of the mental health challenges that educators have and students have. And ironically, it was released on March 15th of 2020. So this became a major impetus of shifting our focus to the emotional and mental well-being side of what we do in corporate facilities and institutional facilities and construction. In May of last year, Dr. Jernigan and I'll introduce you to him in just a minute, released this workbook. And we've made this workbook available to you, the digital copy, for free. And I'll let you know if you want to get a physical copy, a hard copy, we'll tell you how to do that at the end. So for me, the story begins March of last year. My family and I were enjoying spring break on Padre Island in South Texas. And I started hearing a little bit about this thing called the coronavirus. I didn't pay it much attention until 2 days later when I went to the local grocery store to get supplies. And this is what I found. And I took a picture of it because it just shocked me. Here we are in spring break, but this looked more like they were having a hurricane. This is what happens when this part of the country experiences a hurricane or a mass disaster. Everything gets cleaned out. So going back to Dallas, I had a question about what was going on, and I reached out to Dr. Jernigan, who had collaborated with us in the book, the education book Whole, on the mental health and specifically around the trauma side. So I was asking him, as I was hearing more information about the scale of what we were indicating, please share with me and help me understand what it is we're going to experience. Now, Dr. Jernigan's practice, he's a clinical psychologist in South California. They're in 22 countries, and they primarily specialize in helping the military and countries that experience either tragic situations, environmental disasters, and war. So he's an expert on this whole phenomenon of burnout and PTSD. And I think one of the definitions that's important for us to understand is that there is a qualitative difference between being tired and fatigued, stress fatigued, adrenal fatigue, and burnout. Now, burnout, this is his definition. It's when there's 1,000 invisible betrayals of purpose that go unnoticed until it's too late. The reason this is an important distinction is it's more than just being tired, and it doesn't get restored quickly. When you lose faith in your institution or your organization, when you lose faith in leadership, when you feel like the promises that were made cannot be kept, that's a moral condition as well as a physical condition. And so we have to understand that when people experience burnout, it's more than just taking a 2-week vacation to come back. So as we look at a mass disaster, These are the emotional stages, and it's like a roller coaster that you can see. There's a predictable process, and there's a government website that goes through how to emotionally prepare groups and populations through mass disasters. And you can see that there is this warning side of it, this pre-disaster side, where there's heightened awareness. And depending on whether it's a novel case or in the case of my wife having grown up in Mobile, Alabama, hurricane, there's this response that you get prepared for. But then there is the impact. And for most of us, that impact came when we canceled classes and we decided that we were going to either work from home or learn from home. So that impact, now for me, that impact meant that somewhere in mid-April, all of my business for 2020 disappeared because my business model was getting on a plane, flying in to do either a keynote like this or a workshop or do consulting, and it was gone. Then there is this heroic stage. It's the adrenaline stage that lifts everybody's energy. You see the best of people, you see collective will. And the challenge with that is because it's an adrenaline-induced stage, it doesn't last long, a couple weeks at the longest. And part of the challenge is I've been coaching people through this pandemic. What you're seeing is that this adrenaline stage begins to work into fatigue and stress fatigue. So we were not designed to do this for months in and of itself. We were designed to do this for a short period of time. And I think a lot of institutions saw this higher performance level as a sign that work from home was a new opportunity for us. So I'll share with you some of the unintended health consequences of this learn from home or work from home environment. There's typically this settling out period for a lot of organizations. It was last summer, thinking that the heat would burn off the virus, that we would come back again in the fall. And so there's this little breathing room. But then what happens in a mass disaster are triggers and setbacks. And that creates a kind of collapse of morale and motivation and resiliency into this disillusionment stage. It does bottom out and it begins to build back slowly, but organizations need to understand the stages, kind of measure where they're at with reality, because the recovery, the psychological recovery from a mass disaster can be years, it can be decades. I know of people who experienced 9/11 in New York City, and still to this day, they get triggered if they see the Twin Towers or if they see somebody minimizing it. It really sets them off. And that's the nature of trauma. One of the things that Dr. Jernigan indicated, that the research is showing that up to 100 million Americans have experienced either a level 1 or level 2 trauma. Now, to give you some perspective on that, prior to the pandemic, it was about 4 in 100 employees that had some form of post-traumatic stress. Now we're anticipating, as we go back, it could be as much as 3 in 10. So you need to kind of take that in and absorb what that could mean. It also means that there will be delayed reactions, that what we see today won't really manifest until we begin to trigger, whether it's shifting back and picking up new behaviors and habits again or new routines. The triggering event is a delayed reaction. The other part of this too is that we've all gone through certain stages. At the beginning of the pandemic, when my clients began to cancel, and shock, a little bit of denial, thinking, okay, they'll just put it back a few dates. Then it was a little bit of anger for me. Why are we canceling? We could make this work. But I was able to quickly pivot and get through the stages. Now, remember, these are natural stages of dealing with loss. So if anybody's telling you they didn't go through this, they're probably in the denial phase. And part of the challenge and part of what I'm encouraging my clients is find ways, helpful ways to have these conversations in the workplace in safe environments. So my story, getting back to post-traumatic growth, actually begins in 1999. I was a newly minted vice president moving from DC to Texas. I was in the office furniture industry at the time, and I had a 10-year contract so that by 2010, I would have been retired. And as you can see, that didn't happen. And then we had the dot-com crash. It began for us with telecommunications. We had a couple major clients. And within a few months, beginning of November of 2000, we lost 70% of our revenue quickly. I came in March into the office. My internet wasn't working well. I thought there was a technical problem. And the IT person said, you need to talk to the owner. And that's when I discovered that I had been demoted. And what he said, first, he ripped up my contract. Then he said, we don't need a VP of sales. We need sales. Either you can leave today or go back into sales, which meant I went from a very comfortable mid-executive income to a $30,000 draw overnight. And it also meant that I racked up significant credit card debt just trying to stay alive. I had just moved my family, thought I was going to be in bankruptcy for many, many times over. It took 5 years for me to build back. But during those 5 years, in early 2000, I began to discover the tools and the disciplines so that I would never allow myself physically, mentally, to be impacted by an event again like that. So let's look at where I was. In 2000, as you can see here with my son, I was 195 pounds. I was stressed, and that stress translated into the family. So I wasn't a very good dad. I wasn't a very good husband. I was trying to survive, and I didn't have all the tools I needed to do it with resilience. I had also not picked up a tennis racket in 15 years, and you can see that in the picture here. So during the war, during the war with Iraq, we began to see as a nation high percentages of soldiers coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 18% of soldiers. It was alarming. Up to 500,000 soldiers were coming back just from one of the wars. So the Army wanted to find out, number one, why this was happening at such a high rate. And number two, is there a way to prepare soldiers going in so that they could handle and build that resilience? And they called in Dr. Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. And we'll talk about him a little bit more. And what they found is that a small percentages of soldiers that had post-traumatic stress were also coming back stronger. And what it led to is looking at 5 disciplines. And we added a 6th, and you'll see why it'll make complete sense to you when I tell you about the 6th one. So here are the 6 disciplines. And remember the acronym RACE P2. Discipline 1, a resilient mindset. Discipline 2, activate your strengths daily. Discipline 3, your circle of 5 vital relationships. Discipline 4, energy. 4, energy. Discipline 5, purpose. And discipline 6, progress. So let's begin. So you have a worksheet that was emailed early this morning, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on some of these questions. I'm going to set up the question, but what I'd like you to do is go back and reflect on these with the worksheet you have. So you've got the worksheet with all of these. If you're comfortable, I'd like you to put into the chat some of your answers to these. So this first one, through this pandemic, through 2020, rate yourself from a surviving to thriving on a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 being barely making it, 10 being thriving. So go ahead and rate yourself, and we'll look at some of the results through that. So what is a resilient mindset? This is Dr. Martin Seligman. He's the lead psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania, the former president of the American Psychological Association, and the father of positive psychology. And here, the resilient mindset is building up that ability to take on resistance, to take on setbacks and bounce back and stay consistent through it. There's two key principles behind resilient mindset. The first one is understanding what you can control and what you can control, knowing that difference, and then focusing on what you can control. Then the second key principle is playing the hand that you're dealt. My mom was a great mentor in playing the hand that you're dealt. Now, there are 5 components to a resilient mindset. The first one is agency. And agency is that feeling that I've got the willpower to control how I think about things, regardless of the events. I can control my attitude. I can control my behavior. It's not going to change who I am. Secondly, self-efficacy, which is the feeling and the sense that I have the ability to cope. The third is focus. Now, we've all heard of the 80-20 principle. During times of crisis, that focus has to get even narrower. So I put 10-90. And in war, they talk about the fog of war. In crisis, it's a fog of all kinds of things coming at you emotionally. And narrowing in on the essentials is so key during times of stress and times of disaster like we're in. Grit. This is Carol Dweck's research, who was a student of Dr. Seligman. This is that persistence. It's the tortoise versus the hare. It's the ability to take one step at a time, following the path towards getting stronger versus trying to focus on outcomes or positive outcomes at the end. It's on the process. And then the fifth one is gratitude. And we've all heard the vital importance of gratitude, but few of us actually exercise it as a discipline in the morning, in the evening. I call those bookend days. And a bookend day, remember, there's 2 parts of the day you have the most control over. It's the very first part of the day, the morning and the evening. And looking at these as either getting my mind prepped or getting or reviewing the day at the end of the day so I can reconcile and get ready for the next day. Now, here's another key part. It's called eliminating the kryptonite, the unhealthy coping behaviors. And I borrowed the phrase eliminating the kryptonite from Brian Johnson. He's a great kind of philosopher, self-help person that I've followed for a while. But these are critical because what happens under stress is a lot of times we lose that 10-90 focus. We lose that what's the next most important thing to do. And we deal with the anxiety through unhealthy coping behaviors. Distractions and clutter get in the way. Our phones, we know the research is clear that phones and social media, people who spend a good bit of time on that are less happy, more depressed. We also know too that both phones and social media are designed to be addictive because of the dopamine hits. We have to discipline that. Then there's default days. In other words, it's the opposite of having a day by design. These are days that you let happen to you instead of navigating it through with a purpose. The one that gets many, many people is dealing the unhealthy coping behaviors of comfort food and alcohol. And that's a killer for sleep. It's also a killer over time. And I coached a lot of people that after the first couple months of the pandemic, they said, I've gained 10 pounds, I've gained 15 pounds. That's an unhealthy coping behavior. And then finally, vegging out in front of Netflix binge watching, sedentary. You need to move and stay active. The second principle is activating your strengths. And the father of this discipline is Dr. Donald Clifton, who happened to be a mentor of Martin Seligman. Dr. Donald Clifton was also a former president of the American Psychological Association, and you may know him through the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment or Gallup. He bought Gallup several decades ago. And his focus in the 50s and the radical research that he brought was instead of trying to figure out how to minimize people's dysfunctions and maladies, how do we optimize people for success and happiness? So that was radical in the 50s, and it was the the forerunner of positive psychology. So here's another little assessment that I'll walk you through. If you haven't taken an assessment on identifying what you're naturally good at, just ask yourself, what do you naturally do well and enjoy most? What activities really absorb you, where you lose track of time? And then on the flip side, what activities or situations actually drain you? Now, here's another item below. These are other questions that I would like you to consider too. And you can put a ranking, a number where you fit in the chat if you're interested, if you feel comfortable. First, am I energized and engaged daily? Am I engaged and energized during the week? Do I have as many good days as draining days during the week? Do I feel drained before the end of the day on most days? Or do I feel drained most of the time? That's a good beginning indicator. Now, for me, in 2000, I discovered the Clifton strengths. And the reason I like it, it's measuring your strongest synaptic clusters. In other words, what you naturally do best and enjoy most. These are your raw natural talents. And the research shows that when you activate those talents, you're activating dopamine. And when you get into that flow state, you're releasing endorphins, which we know as the runner's high. That's that endurance. Now, what you see at the bottom left is you see my top 5 strengths from the assessment, and you see them as colors. There's a company in 2005 that developed a color quadrant system by the name of Core Clarity, and it buckets these strengths into relationship categories, motivational categories, cognitive categories, and action-oriented categories. And what you can see in my 5 strengths is that the strategic, the learner, and the connectedness are cognitive. The achiever is action-oriented, and the relator is a relationship strength, natural strength. It gives you that intuitive ability. It's like having a first language around these traits that you have. Now, I don't have any of the magenta, and that's neither good nor bad. It just designates a certain style that I have. When you put these all together and look at the pattern, there's a certain leadership style, and it's called a servant leader archetype. Now, it also tells me where I recover best. Excuse me. So if you look at the colors, you'll notice that the green is the most prominent color. So when I want to recover, rejuvenate, I go into my head. I spend time reflecting, thinking. So everybody is going to have a different pattern. That's why it's important to know that my recovery plan, if you're getting coaching from somebody, is going to be different than somebody who has lots of orange or action-oriented. Their recovery plan may be cleaning out the pantry, doing something physical that feels like a sense of accomplishment that's discretionary. So it's really important as we help people learn strategies for building resilience that we don't do a one-size-fits-all. The circle of 5. Gallup's research shows that those who are happy and resilient have at least 5 key individuals that would come at 2 a.m. in the morning if you're stuck on the side of the road and help you. Now, they may chew you out for not fixing the tire when they told you earlier, but they'll come and help you. They will also hold you to your best self. They won't just encourage and coddle you, but they will challenge you as well. And what we know are 2 things. One is that the average American only has 1.5 individuals that they could consider to be part of their circle of 5. Now, I'd like to know who the half individual is, but that is part of what we've heard is the loneliness epidemic. With this isolation, work from home, that's only gotten worse or harder. And we're seeing that in the mental health statistics. Also, it's key and vital that there be one in the workplace, a companion in the workplace that helps you through the ups and downs of what you're experiencing at work. So here's another assessment opportunity. Rate your circle of 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. And now go and make a list of those in your family, your friends, your colleagues. Start thinking intentionally. This is about designing this as an intentional strategy for resilience, not taking it for granted. And there's another important piece to the equation too. Ask yourself, am I vital to somebody? If so, who? And am I being the kind of support that I could be for that person that I'm vital to? Energy. Now, there's a whole area we can get into in energy. I'm focusing on one piece to the equation, and that's sleep. Now, the reason I'm focusing on sleep is that in 2016, this became the biggest game changer in my life, is recognizing that I was not getting adequate sleep or the quality of sleep I needed. I was running on a gap between my recovery levels and my output levels, which leads to, in sports performance term, adrenal fatigue or overtraining syndrome. So sleep also is probably the fastest way to build your bounce back. You know quite well, if you've got kids, you know what it's like when they did not get a good night's sleep and what it's like at home trying to deal with them. You know what you're like when you're tired and you didn't get a good night's sleep. You're less resilient, less tolerant, more reactive. I truly believe if this was a mandate in our country, if every school and institution did an experiment, 2 weeks, everybody gets a full night's sleep, and that's 8 to 9 hours of sleep, or 8 to 9 hours in bed, which if we'll go through the numbers, that means that you're probably getting somewhere around 7.5 hours of quality sleep. If we did that, I think we would change the whole tone in the country today. We would be more civil because we're rested. So here's a couple things to ask yourself on the sleep factor. What time do you typically go to bed at night? We know from research that your most rejuvenating time, the restorative time in your brain, is before 2 a.m. We know sleep cycles are about 90 minutes. So calculate, how many sleep cycles are you getting in before 2 a.m.? If you're only getting 1.5, possibly 2, then it's an opportunity to look at improving that. And what time, how many hours are you in bed? And then what time do you go to bed? Now, not all sleep is equal. And that's another workshop we do on looking at sleep. You can be in bed, but not getting quality sleep. You can be taking sleep medication, and sleep medication doesn't help you sleep. It makes you unconscious, but it doesn't help the brain recover. So those are all things, and I'll give you some references where you can go and look at it. What are your typical activities about 2 hours before you go to bed? Mine are, I have a digital sunset right about 8:30 at night, and I begin winding down and getting rid of the technology. Here's a new phenomenon in the problem of fatigue or strain versus recovery. It's these Zoom presentations. Now, in this environment, your brain is consuming twice the energy that it does in real life. And the reason is that for me to function in here, it's mediated. One, I can't see people's voices. I can't feel how people are moving or responding. So my brain has to fill in all of that, and it's more work. In normal work settings, your brain is consuming about 20 to 30% of your energy. That's right. It's the largest calorie consuming organ you have. In this virtual environment, it's consuming up to 50%. Now, as I said, since 2016, I've been measuring this through some new sports technology. One is called the Whoop strap, which you might be able to see here, and then the Aura ring. And I'm measuring it the strain in terms of calories. So when I do a workshop, this is an example of a 4-hour workshop I gave using my Aura ring, and it measured that I burned 4,500 calories. Now, if you're a sports enthusiast, you know that there's very few things you can do for 4 hours that will generate 4,500 calories. And it equates it. What I like about it, it gives me a context, an equivalency. It was the strain load of walking 29.7 miles. So if you feel drained at the end of the day around 3 o'clock, this is why. And we've worked out what we call a work equivalency number. There's your clock work. If you're working 8 hours a day, but you're on screen doing this for 6 hours, that's the work equivalency in terms of strain of 14 hours. And we've yet to really learn how to manage and build sustainability with that. Now, you may ask, why? If I'm burning that many calories, how come I'm not losing weight? There's two simple answers. One, they're stress calories, and it's telling your body that you're in survival mode. So hold on to all the calories you can. And number two, there may be some unhealthy coping behaviors at the end of the day to cope with the stress as well. So one of the things we've seen, we just saw the Super Bowl, and one of Tom Brady's magic tricks is sleep. He's 43 years old at the peak. And so in 2016, I started seeing articles on people like Tom Brady, Roger Federer, who is kind of the senior citizen in tennis, Justin Verlander in baseball, and noticing that part of the research is around this overtraining syndrome that athletes have had that led to injuries and burnout, and how the new recovering protocols are sleep. LeBron James gets 10 to 12 hours of sleep a night. This is the new recovery protocol. It's been my recovery protocol since 2016, and it's been transforming for me. So again, if you think I'm putting some emphasis on sleep, I am. Here are two great resources for you. Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker is for those who really like to get into the research and science around sleep. If you want more of the practical tips, Sleep Smarter is a great resource for you to take along with you. Purpose. So this is Viktor Frankel. Viktor Frankel is known for having developed logotherapy. He is also an Auschwitz survivor. One of the things he noticed is that some people had a certain mindset that gave them a will to live, and that was purpose. And that purpose was around things that were bigger than them, things beyond them, and a purpose of helping people on a daily basis, making significant change. It's that will to live. And so there's some good questions here for you to reflect upon. First, do you know your purpose? In my coaching, I find very few people who've really thought about what is that will to live that I have? What is that essence inside of me that gives me that drive to overcome? Who am I living for beyond me? And what am I living for beyond me that's bigger than me? Who am I making a difference to daily? And then who am I vital to? Those are great questions to reflect upon and a key part of that resilience factor. Then there's what I've developed recently called the genius factor. And I first heard about this through Ken Robinson, who has one of the most watched TED Talks of all times and wrote the book Element. And he cites a NASA research paper. And that NASA research paper talks about an assessment that they developed to test and assess aspiring astronauts. And one of the key challenges is that in a novel environment, when problems arise and there's no real protocols that we know how to follow, creativity is essential, being able to think through in novel ways. As they gave this assessment to the broader population, what they discovered is that 95% of preschoolers tested as geniuses. By age 15, it was only 15%. By age 31, it was 2%. So part of this is that there's this unique piece of you that you're born with. The Greeks called it your genius. And that was part of you at your birth. But over time, in environments and institutions that mandate standardized performance and conforming, we lose touch of that unique factor on who we are. Walt Disney, I was trained in creativity through a mentor or a protege of Walt Disney. His name's Michael Vance. And I studied him through the 80s. He was a big influence, and he shared a conversation that he and Walt Disney had when Epcot Center opened. And Walt Disney said, you know, Michael, one of the challenges in the world is that there are too many copies and not enough originals. The more you are like yourself, the less you are like anyone else, which makes you unique. And it's that unique factor that people are attracted to. Now, in Michael Vance's seminars, he would go on to add that nobody wants to go to kind of like Disney. So this unique factor, discovering it, knowing that you have unique capabilities is key. When you take the Clifton strengths, for example, of those top 5, there are 33,600,000 combinations of those top 5. So we use that tool to help people get a start on identifying what is unique about you and how do you develop what we call that genius factor that you have. Maslow talks about this intuition about our potential and that this aspiring desire that what we can become, there's this inner drive we must become and move towards that realization called self-fulfillment of what our potential is all about. And then Joseph Campbell, the mythologist who inspired George Lucas in The Hero's Journey, talks about in his research in all the major wisdom traditions that there's this principle, this universal principle that the universe is waiting for you to show up as your true self. And that's what makes vital change in the universe. The final element is progress. Progress, not perfection. But the question is, what are you measuring? And what I found in my coaching is that the normal means, the algorithm that people have been using for happiness, the career, the satisfaction of the work, all the externals have gone away. So all of these relate to intrinsic qualities of health and happiness and purpose and mindset. And that also gets into the measurement instrument of looking at leading indicators, getting back to the fundamentals and disciplines. So do you have daily fundamentals and disciplines that keep you anchored? Replacing willpower with small and tiny habits. Consistency over grand attempts. Do you show up every day? Do you try to be your best self? Are you working, seeing the outside externals as helping you become a better version of yourself and using that as your success matrix? And as you reflect on the day and you see, you know, my strategic strength was exercise today, or my zest, that's a virtues assessment Dr. Seligman had. I felt energy today, and you celebrate those virtues, those internal qualities that you have. These lead to not only individual resilience, but organizational resilience. So let's end the story. At 66, I turned 66 in January. I'm healthier than I was 20 years ago when I was 195 pounds. I'm actually 153 pounds as the scale shared this morning. My business recovered in 5 months versus 5 years. And I would encourage that you all take the real age assessment developed by Dr. Michael Roizen, who's at the Cleveland Clinic, and Dr. Oz Mehmet. It measures your chronological health versus your biological health. I took it this weekend just to check. And so what the stat shows is that my 66 years of age, I'm actually 9 years younger in my body. And you can live younger. Resilience is a way to recapture energy, vitality, performance improvement, and live younger. And you don't have to do grand things to get there. You just start a little bit at a time. So let's look at this as a final assessment. Take this assessment, put sleep at the top, and rank the next 5. Again, sleep is your fastest way to get that bounce back into your step. But then rank the next 5. And what you'll do as a strategy is you'll begin with the strongest and build on it. Then you'll go to the next one. Then you'll go to the next one. Then you'll go to the next one. So if you'd like to get a hard copy of the document, you can go to my website under products, use the coupon code CalState. You'll not only get access to be able to buy the hard copy version of the workbook, you've got the free digital copy. And there's also 3 webinars and interviews with Dr. Jernigan and myself. Again, you can follow me either on LinkedIn, YouTube, or this is my website. And it's a privilege and an honor. I'm passionate because I feel that the key core strategy for the future, whether it's in education or in corporate or for the nation, we're in a new era. And resiliency's got to be part of the strategy, the core strategy that we have as organizations, as leaders, and as individuals. So thank you very much. And we'll open this up to some questions and answers.
Rex, thank you so much. That was very inspirational. And I was actually in New York City on September 11th, and that really struck a strong chord with me. Our first question is kind of more pointed to an academic group at CSU, but I'm going to kind of convert it a little bit. So the assessment ratio of Zoom time to work time, and we hear a lot about the talk about Zoom burnout.
Yes.
What is that ratio? Can you go a little bit further into that?
Well, it's a great question. So there hasn't been any research, but what I've found, so this is called a swag estimate. It's to create the awareness that this is taking more energy. But as you saw with the Oura Ring, you saw that a 4-hour session burned 4,500 calories. I don't do that playing 4 hours of tennis. So we know there is this cognitive load. I don't know what the ratio is, but when I coach people, I try to bring it home to them because I coach a lot of executives and they say they work 10 hours or 12 hours a day. They're doing, global work and they're on screen 10 hours a day. So when I give them the number that, okay, you worked 12 hours clock time and you were on 10 hours, you worked the equivalent of a 22-hour day. That's to make a point. The research isn't in yet. We know it does take more cognitive load, but when they see that, they say, oh, that explains why I'm wiped out by 3 o'clock. So it's trying to make that point. And then breaking up the day. The protocol I use, I'm at a stand-up desk right now. I only do 45-minute meetings with a 15-minute break. During that 15-minute break, I go through something NASA developed called non-exercise activity. It's a way to get movement, get the blood flowing. I do simple 10 sit-ups, 5 push-ups, 5 deep knee bends, and then I force myself to walk downstairs, get water, come back upstairs, and then readjust my desk. That keeps me moving through the day. When I wasn't doing that, my Oura Ring was saying I'm sitting too much, I'm too stationary. So anyway, I think helping redesign this experience in terms of through the lens of resiliency is another piece that leaders and managers need to think about.
Great. And Rex, one more time, can you share your website? Maybe you could share screen really quick and show everybody. I think it was up there really quick and maybe some people.
Yeah, I'm sensitive to not do sales stuff.
Sure. I'm getting a lot of questions about the website and.
Yeah. So the easy one, it's rexmiller.com. That makes it easy. And then you'll find the products section on there.
Great.
Okay. All right.
And then there was a lot of talk and there were a lot of questions about the Clifton strengths and employee engagement.
Yeah.
I took this when I was actually, I did time at Jacobs and
I like the way you phrase that.
If anybody's worked at Jacobs,
yes,
you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
But with the Clifton strengths and the engagement, we did it as a whole, and we actually switched teams. We actually reformed our project teams because we found certain people would work better with other people. And it worked like a dream. I mean, it worked very, very well.
Yes. Yeah, I use this for every large project that I'm on as kind of the beginning to understand how I'm wired to do my best, how others are wired differently, how to appreciate those differences. What I like about this particular assessment versus others is this is really measuring how you're wired. You know, it's those dense synaptic clusters that fire. So it's not a personality profile. We can tell a little bit about personality through it. There's other assessments out. The other one we use as well is Dr. Seligman's Virtue or Character Strength Assessment. That's a free assessment at the University of Pennsylvania. And it'll share your 24 innate character strengths and rank those similarly. So what we like to do when we're helping someone figure out kind of that genius factor they have, recapture their uniqueness. What are your talents? What are your innate character traits? Let's use this as a beginning point or a compass.
Right. So this one's from Colleen Barsley. I've heard about people who spend a lot of time on social media and their phones tend to be more depressed, but it's not clear to me which causes which. Do depressed people spend more time on their screens, or does the screen time catalyze depression?
Well, I think that's a great question. So the screen time, first of all, it's addictive. It's designed to be addictive. The research is out. And because it continues to hit that dopamine. So those are short-term hits. And so that brings this need to come back over and over. So there's that addictive side to it, but also depressed people look for unhealthy coping behavior, distractions, ways to modify. So I don't think it's an either or. And, we're seeing with the youth that you've got some youth that are so addicted that they can't even have a conversation with you without looking down at their phone. The average person looks at their phone 150 times a day. Yeah, that's right. So part of this, so for example, one of the things I did right after the election is I went on a media fast. I thought it was going to be for a month. I haven't looked at media. Now I am on LinkedIn, so that's a business tool that I use, but I haven't looked up news. I haven't, first of all, you hear it from friends anyway. There's a kind of ambient news. But what I found is I've gained an extra 30 to 40 minutes a day. I've put that to more productive use. I don't go to bed wondering if the world's going to be over tomorrow. Or what conspiracy is happening, or I don't look at, gee, I need this new remedy or cure for the itch that I now have. So that I would say disciplining that's why we have a digital sunset in our house where at 8:30, we just shut it all down.
That's great. Yeah, in my house, we do no phones upstairs.
That's a great discipline. Yeah, right.
From an organization, or how to pull out of the burnout?
Yeah, well, first of all, that I would recommend getting with a clinical psychologist to do a workup. It could be fatigue or stress fatigue. It could be real burnout. What I've been finding with a lot of the individuals, and I've had, this is a really timely question because it seems like towards the end of the year, a lot of people were questioning, do I want to stay with this organization? Can I take it? What I was finding is that they're measuring the external sides of it and moving them slowly to see who they might be at their best through their intrinsic strengths, and how do the circumstances help them to do that is an energy shift. So most of the people I've been able to convince that it's not the external environment that's really challenging you, it's the internal. Dr. Ahmed Sood at the Mayo Clinic did research on people who have suffered mass disasters.
I think we lost him.
Yep, looks like he may have froze there, Jeremy.
Well, it's all that weather in Texas.
Oh, yeah. Just I don't think we may have mentioned it. He's in Texas, right in the middle of it all right now. Definitely. And he is really we were lucky to get him in the first place. He's had power outages all around him, and And we are lucky that we got as far as we did. It looks like he's actually completely offline now.
Yeah.
So we may have completely lost him.
And Sean, I do want to mention, I just threw his YouTube link in the chat because he has a lot of great content on construction delivery methods, collaborative and trust-based construction, kind of workplace environments, workplace culture, education environments and cultures. So he's got a lot of full-length presentations actually on his YouTube channel on those other topics. So I put that in there as a resource if everybody wants to grab that link and save it or favorite it, and you can kind of look at which ones apply to you, because there is a great breadth of content that he has on his channel.
Well, that's great. Thank you for throwing that in there, Kevin. And I see that there are several questions that are still in the Q&A pod. What we'll do is we'll collect up those questions and we'll send them over to Rex, and we'll see if we can get to him to answer those, and we'll repost them so that we get all of these questions answered.
Hello, Cal State. I am following up with some of the questions. I feel very fortunate that we got down to the final 2 minutes before the internet went out. First, I will include links to the Whoop strap, which is the primary one I use, to the Aura Ring, to the Virtues Assessment, and the Real Age Assessment. So those will be in the email. One of the questions is about the Aura Ring. How do I like having it next to my wedding ring finger? Well, it's better than on my right hand because that's my tennis hand. So playing with any kind of ring on my fingers really impedes my tennis. So no great answer for you there, but that's the reason why it's over here. And it doesn't bother me at all. It's fine and it's natural. My wife also has one next to her ring finger. So number 2, how do we shift the culture to move to 45-minute meetings? It's a great question. The first thing I would recommend is start a conversation and just look at your current meetings and ask the question, can we get as much done in 45 minutes if we plan, if we focus on it? There's a law, it's called Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law essentially says that work expands to fill time. I believe that's doubly true for meetings. If you plan an hour, you're going to take an hour. If you plan 30 minutes, you'll take 30 minutes. So find that sweet spot. You need decompression time between meetings. One of my clients described how it is today that they go from one Zoom meeting to another Zoom meeting with no break in between, no decompression time. That puts you in kind of the state of an astronaut, that non-movement. You need what's called non-exercise activity. You can look it up. The other acronym is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. But your body needs to move to get the cortisol out of your system, to get the blood flowing back into your brain. You need times to get refreshed. Another question is, how do these disciplines and the whole Zoom conversation benefit students? That's a great question, and it raises bigger issues about the resiliency level of students in general. One of the challenges is that we have an obesity epidemic. By the time kids graduate from high school, 20% are obese. By the time they graduate from college, 40% are obese. By the time they get into their 40s and 50s, we have over 60% of our population obese. That is a driver for chronic disease. It is also a key vulnerability for things like the coronavirus. So these are very relevant in terms of helping students understand how to build resiliency. I think now colleges need to consider having courses, required courses on life management, and this would be part of it. I think this would be a great student campaign around resiliency. You've got some very creative students and you got a huge system there. And this starts with awareness, then it moves into peer groups, early adopters. This is a process of making an awareness shift, just like students have been doing with some of the social issues. I would recommend you bring a student group together to begin something like that. One of the big challenges organizations face is, how do you take care of the caregivers and the first responders and those in 24/7 access? So that's a management conversation to recognize that these individuals are at risk and these individuals need to be cared for. We call this the Caregiver Dilemma. people who are in these roles know that their mission is to care for others, but the implication is that if others come first, they come last. That's an organizational shift that needs to be made. So again, thank you. I'm also going to include a link to my online store and let you download a workshop giving to an integrated project delivery symposium last fall on the first 100 days of a project. So thank you so much. Please take advantage of the digital workbook. Please check out LinkedIn and get this kind of content that I post regularly. Sign up on LinkedIn with me. So take care, stay safe.